The Great Hall of the Galactic Council had never been so quiet. It was a massive place, built long before humanity had even learned to write. The ceiling stretched so high that the upper seats were lost in shadow. The walls were made of a stone that no one could name anymore, dark and smooth, and older than most of the species sitting inside it. 500 delegates from 47 worlds sat in curved rows that rose from the floor like a bowl. Some had 4 arms. Some had no arms at all. Some breathed gases that would kill a human in seconds. But tonight, every single one of them was watching the same thing. They were watching the humans. Ambassador Yara Chen stood at the center podium. She was a small woman, dark-haired, with tired eyes that had seen too many of these meetings. She wore a plain blue jacket. No medals, no decorations, just the small silver pin on her collar that marked her as Earth's voice in this place. She had been speaking for 3 hours already, answering questions, defending decisions, explaining choices that most of the council had already decided they did not like. But now the talking was done. High Consul Veth Ara, who led the proceedings on behalf of the council, rose from the central chair. He was tall even by the standards of his kind, the Veil, pale, thin-limbed creatures with long fingers and wide silver eyes. His voice, when it came, was calm and flat and final. "The matter has been discussed at length," he said. "The record shows 81 years of membership for the planet Earth and its people. In that time, the following violations have been logged." He did not look at a screen, he had memorized it. Unsanctioned terraforming of 3 celestial bodies within the outer ring, in breach of Article 9. Unauthorized uplift of artificial intelligence systems to Class 4 sentience, in breach of the Sentience Accords. Unilateral first contact with the Dari, a pre-contact species, in breach of every relevant protocol. Repeated refusal to submit military capability assessments to the Joint Registry. And, most recently, the installation of deep-range sensor arrays in neutral space without council approval. The hall was still. Each violation was discussed. Each warning was given. Each time, Earth's representatives expressed understanding, offered partial cooperation, and then continued as before. Veth Ara pause. "The Council has concluded that humanity does not intend to follow the rules that every other member world agreed to follow. It has therefore voted, by 44 votes to 3, to remove Earth from membership with immediate effect." He looked at Yara then. "Ambassador Chen, Earth's access to shared trade routes will end in 30 standard days. Its communications access to the Council network will be severed in 60. All diplomatic staff will be recalled within 90. Earth is, as of this moment, no longer a member of the Galactic Council." Silence. Then, somewhere in the rows above, a delegate muttered something in a clicking language. Another made a sound like rushing water. Sympathy, or perhaps satisfaction, it was hard to tell. A few of the 3 who had voted against the motion sat with their heads low. The Terran ambassador, a heavy-set being with orange skin and 4 hands, was looking at the floor. Yara Chen did not look at the floor. She stood at the podium with her hands clasped in front of her. Her face did not change. She took one slow breath, and then she did something that no one in the hall expected. She smiled. It was not a big smile. It was small and quiet, and utterly calm, like someone who had just been told they would not be invited to a party they had not wanted to attend in the first place. Veth Ara noticed it. The silver eyes narrowed slightly. "Does the ambassador wish to make a final statement?" "No, High Consul," Yara said. Her voice was steady. "I think everything has been said. Then, this session is closed." She stepped down from the podium, walked the length of the central aisle, and left the hall without looking back. Outside in the long corridor that smelled faintly of ozone and old metal, 2 of her staff were waiting. Davi, her assistant, a young man from Lagos with worried eyes, fell into step beside her. "Ambassador," he said quietly, "are you all right?" "Fine," she said. "They really did it." "Yes. What do we do now?" Yara walked a few more steps before she answered. The corridor was empty except for them. The sound of the hall behind them was already fading. She thought about the 30 days until the trade routes closed, the 60 days until the communications blackout, the 90 days until every human diplomat on every council world had to pack their things and go home. She thought about what Earth would look like after that. Cut off, alone. No access to the shared lanes that connected 100 worlds. No seat at the table where galactic decisions got made. No protection from whatever came next. She thought about all the things she knew that the council did not know. She smiled again. The same small, quiet smile. "We go home," she said. "There's a lot of work to do." Davi looked at her sideways. He had worked with her for 9 years. He knew her well enough to be nervous when she sounded that calm. "What kind of work?" She did not answer right away. They reached the exit, and the doors opened ahead of them, and beyond the doors was the cold dark of an alien sky, and the lights of 100 ships moving slow and quiet above the city, like stars that had somewhere to be. "The kind that takes time," Yara said, "the kind that nobody sees coming." She walked out into the dark. Back in the hall, the delegates were still talking. Some were relieved, some were troubled. A few were already thinking about what it meant, practically, strategically, to have Earth outside the network instead of inside it. Veth Ara was one of the few who was thinking hardest. He had not missed that smile. He had been a diplomat for 60 years, and he had seen many kinds of smiles. Angry smiles, sad smiles, polite smiles that meant nothing at all. He had not seen one quite like that before. It stayed with him that night, and the night after, and for many nights that followed. He told himself it was nothing, a diplomat's face, trained composure. Earth had lost, and the human woman had simply been too proud to show it. He told himself that. But the smile did not go away. 30 days later, the trade routes closed. Earth said nothing. 60 days later, the network access ended. Earth said nothing. 90 days later, the last human diplomat left the last council world, and the doors between humanity and the rest of the galaxy clicked quietly shut. And in the silence that followed, far away on a blue planet, at the edge of a quiet arm of the Milky Way, a great deal of very interesting work began. 30 years passed. The galaxy moved on. New trade agreements were signed. New disputes came and went. The council expanded by 2 members, lost one to civil war, and spent several years debating the rights of a newly discovered species of deep ocean creatures on a frozen moon near the galactic core. Big things happened, as they always did. Small things happened too. Alliances shifted. Old friendships cooled. New ones formed in the complicated way that politics always works, slowly and without anyone fully noticing. Earth was not discussed much. At first there had been some talk. A few council members had raised concerns in the early years, not for Earth's sake, but for the sake of the 3 species that had voted against the banishment. The Terek, the Newell, and the small, quiet Asha had all maintained that the vote was a mistake. They had argued, politely and at length, that removing humanity was like cutting off a useful hand, because it sometimes moved without permission. Nobody had listened. The vote had stood. After a few years, even those 3 stopped raising it. Earth was gone. That was that. What no one on the council was watching, because no one had thought to watch, was what Earth was doing. The planet had gone quiet. That much was visible from the outside. No diplomatic signals, no formal requests, no protests or demands. The humans had simply pulled back behind their own borders and stopped talking. Some council members read this as shame. Others read it as sulking. A few of the older and more experienced diplomats wondered, briefly, whether it meant something else, but they were busy with other things, and the wondering did not last long. What was actually happening was this. The compact did not announce itself. It did not hold a ceremony, or send press releases, or ask for anyone's permission. It simply grew, quietly and steadily, the way a tree grows, not all at once, not with fanfare, but continuously, and in every direction. It started with the Asha. They had 3 fingers on each of their 4 hands, wide dark eyes built for low light, and a way of speaking that sounded to most other species like wind through dry grass. They lived on 2 worlds, in the middle reaches of the outer ring, Not rich worlds, not powerful ones, but warm and livable, and well-positioned for certain trade routes that the Council had always meant to develop, and somehow never had. The Asha had been Council members for 40 years. In 40 years, no major infrastructure project had reached them. No medical exchange program had included them. Their requests for communications relay upgrades had been noted and tabled and noted again. They were, in the language of the Council, a low-priority matter. 6 months after the banishment, a human engineering team arrived at the Asha homeworld. They brought no weapons. They brought no demands. They brought doctors, builders, communication specialists, and enough supplies to run 3 full infrastructure projects simultaneously. They also brought a simple document, written in plain language, which said, "We would like to be your partners. We ask for nothing in return, except the right to ask for help when we need it someday." The Asha signed it, then the Dari signed it, then the Ven, a species of 6-legged nomads who lived on the edges of 3 different star systems, and had been arguing with the Council about territorial rights for 15 years. Then the Olmu, then the Seth, then the Pari. One by one, quietly, without anyone in the Council chambers noticing, the species that the galaxy had ignored were saying yes to something new. By the 10th year, the Terran Compact had 19 member worlds. None of them were rich. None of them were powerful by the usual measures of galactic power, warships, heavy industry, ancient political weight. But they were well positioned, and they were connected, and they were, for the first time in most of their histories, looked after. The human doctors that worked on Asha worlds were good, not just adequate, genuinely good, with medicines and techniques that treated conditions that had simply been untreatable before. The engineers that built on Dari settlements built things that lasted, and they trained local workers while they built, so that when the humans left, the Dari could maintain and expand what had been made. The Terran communications network that grew across compact space was fast and reliable and encrypted and free to use. Nobody was being sold anything. Nobody was paying tribute. Nobody was being asked to change their government or their beliefs or their way of life. It was, to be honest, a little unusual. Admiral Raz Kimani, who had been in another life a naval officer and was now something harder to define, oversaw most of the Compact's expansion from a station that orbited Earth's moon. She had a wall in her office covered in a map of the Compact, and every few months a new dot appeared on it. Each dot was a world. Each world was a partner. She was not a sentimental person, but sometimes she stood in front of that wall for a long time without saying anything. 19, her aide said one morning, updating the count after the Pari signed. 19, she agreed. The Council hasn't noticed yet. Kimani looked at the map. The 19 dots were scattered across the outer and middle rings, spread through regions the Council had always considered secondary. But if you drew lines between them, trade lines, communication lines, the invisible threads of agreements and shared interests, they formed something. A shape, a structure, an alternative. They will, she said. And when they do, it'll be too late to do anything about it. She paused. That's the idea. In the compact worlds, the changes were quieter and more personal. On the Asha homeworld, a young doctor named Seva learned a surgical technique from a human colleague that saved the lives of 18 patients in her first year alone. On a Dari station, children who had grown up knowing only the slow decay of old infrastructure went to schools that had power and heat and clean water for the first time. On a Ven transport ship, an old captain found that the new communications relay meant she could finally talk to her family across 3 systems without a 2-day delay. They were small things. They added up. The Council, from its great hall with the ceiling lost in shadow, looked out at a galaxy that seemed more or less the same as it always had. A few minor species doing somewhat better than before. A small web of trade agreements in the outer ring. Nothing alarming. Nothing worth a formal inquiry. What they did not see, what they would not understand for many years yet, was that the small web was not small at all. It was simply new. And it was growing every season, adding connections and depth and loyalty, one quiet agreement at a time. Yara Chen had retired by then. She lived on a coast in Chile, in a house near the sea, and she spent her days reading and walking and occasionally consulting when asked, for the younger people now running the compact's diplomatic operations. She had a habit of sitting on her porch in the evenings and watching the sky, where the stars came out one by one as the light faded. Sometimes people asked her if she missed the council. She always said no. Sometimes they asked if she was proud of what the compact had become. She said she was proud of the people who built it. Sometimes, rarely, they asked what she had been thinking, back in that great hall, 30 years ago, when she had smiled. She never answered that question directly. She just looked at the sky, and after a moment she said something that only made sense later, when the people asking it had seen what was coming. She said, "There are two ways to change a thing. You can fight it from the inside, or you can build something better outside and wait." She always smiled when she said it. The same small, quiet smile. The first sign of trouble was a blockade. It happened quietly, the way most dangerous things do. The counselor from the Maran hegemony, one of the 3 largest members of the council, and not coincidentally one of the species that had benefited most from the trade routes that the Terran Compact was now quietly redirecting, filed a formal motion in the 15th year of the banishment. The motion claimed that the Dari Territorial Station, newly upgraded with Terran-built relay arrays and communications infrastructure, posed a navigational hazard to Maran shipping in the region. It was, as everyone who read it understood, not really about navigation. The station in question sat at the junction of 3 routes that had once been low-traffic, low-priority corridors. After 10 years of Terran infrastructure work, they had become something quite different. Reliable, fast, well-lit lanes that smaller species preferred enormously to the older council-managed routes, which were perfectly functional, but charged high tolls and ran through Maran-controlled relay checkpoints, where cargo was sometimes delayed by weeks for inspection. The Dari had switched, the Asha had switched, the Ven had switched long ago. 3 other species were in the process of switching. And the Maran, watching their relay toll income drop by 1/3 in 5 years, had decided it was time to do something about it. The council approved the motion. It authorized the Maran to establish a safety inspection zone around the Dari station. In practice, this meant 3 Maran warships taking up position in the approach corridors and stopping every compact-affiliated vessel for what were described as routine checks. The checks took, on average, 4 days. A ship sitting in a holding pattern for 4 days was a ship not delivering medicine to the Asha, not delivering building materials to the new Seth settlement, not carrying the communications technicians who were scheduled to upgrade the Ven relay on the far side of the sector. 4 days became a week. A week became a month. After 2 months, 2 of the smaller compact worlds were running short on certain supplies, and the Dari filed a formal complaint, not with the council, because they were not council members, but with the Terran Compact's coordination office on Earth. The response came 14 hours later. Not a warship, not a threat, not a formal diplomatic protest or a demand for talks, or any of the things the Maran had been quietly prepared to deal with. What came was an engineering fleet. 31 vessels, all of them civilian in designation, arrived at the Dari station in the early morning hours. They were not fast ships, not by the standards of military vessels. They were solid and practical, and built for heavy work. They carried equipment, the kind of equipment used for orbital construction and defense network installation. Within 6 hours of arrival, they had begun work. Within 20 hours, a new orbital array had been partially assembled around the station. Not weapons, but sensor platforms, and communication relays and docking infrastructure. Within 30 hours, 2 new approach corridors had been plotted and marked, running through space that was technically neutral and entirely outside the Maran safety inspection zone. The blockade became overnight, largely irrelevant. The Maran ships were still there. They were still inspecting any vessel that chose to use the old corridors. But no compact vessel was using the old corridors anymore. They were using the new ones, which were clean and fast and free of checkpoints. And the engineering fleet was still at work, still building, still expanding the infrastructure that made them possible. Councillor Veth Ara, who had aged considerably in the 15 years since the banishment, called an emergency session. He was not angry exactly. He was not the type for anger. He was troubled, which was worse. He had spent 60 years learning to read political situations, and what he was reading now felt slippery and difficult in a way that he did not like. "The humans have violated the inspection zone," the Marin representative said. The Marin spoke in a low, growling voice, and they were large creatures with thick hides and small dark eyes, and they were not used to being made to look foolish. "They have not entered the inspection zone," Vethara said carefully. He had checked. "Their new corridors run outside it." They built new corridors in neutral space to circumvent a lawful council order. Vethara looked at the documentation in front of him. He read it again. He looked at the map showing the new corridors. He looked at the list of equipment deployed, the timelines, the technical specifications. He thought about the fact that 31 engineering ships had arrived, built a working alternative to a blockade, and departed within 2 days, leaving behind infrastructure that would serve that region for decades. "Request for explanation from the Terran Compact," he said at last. The response came the next day, delivered through the Asha, who were the closest Compact member with a functioning communications relay. It was very short. It said, "The Terran Compact conducted routine infrastructure maintenance and expansion work in neutral space. No council regulations apply to neutral space. No council regulations were violated. The Compact thanks the Council for its interest." It was signed by a logistics coordinator named Banished, who held no significant diplomatic title. The Marin representative was furious. Several others were unsettled. The Terran ambassador, who had voted against the banishment 30 years ago and had never been fully comfortable about it, said nothing during the session, but was seen afterward standing in the corridor outside the hall for a long time, looking at nothing in particular. Vethara sent a more formal inquiry. What was the scope of the Terran Compact's infrastructure program? How many worlds were involved? What was the extent of the network being built? The reply, again, was polite and brief. The Compact was a cooperative agreement between sovereign worlds. Its internal operations were the business of its members. The Compact was happy to share public information about any infrastructure that affected neutral space. Said politely, but unmistakably clear. In the years that followed, 2 more blockade attempts were made. Both were solved the same way. Not confronted, not fought, but rendered useless by engineering that went around them, underneath them, or simply made them economically pointless by building alternatives that no one wanted to block, because blocking them would be blocking their own citizens from cheaper, faster, better serviced routes. The Council began to see the shape of it. Not fully, not yet, but some of the older delegates, the ones who had been watching politics for long enough to understand what patient, long-term power looked like, were beginning to sense that something had grown in the outer reaches of the galaxy that was not small at all. It had simply been quiet. It had been growing in the silence, in the space between council concerns, in the margins that the powerful had never thought worth watching. Vethara sat in his office one night, the map of known space on the wall, and he drew lines with his finger between the 19 dots that represented Compact member worlds. He traced the communication routes. He marked the new infrastructure corridors. He counted the species that had in 15 years gone from isolated and struggling to connected and stable. He thought about the smile. He had never forgotten it. In 15 years, not once. He sat with his hands on his desk, and he looked at the map for a long time, and slowly, with a feeling like cold water being poured down the back of his neck, he understood that the banishment had not hurt humanity at all. He understood, too late and too slowly, that it had helped them. The star's name, in the oldest language of the people who had first catalogued it, meant something like slow fire. It was a mid-sized star, yellow-orange, 3,000 light-years from the galactic center. It had been burning steadily for 4 billion years. It was, as stars go, unremarkable. And then it began to die. Not quickly. Nothing on that scale ever happens quickly, from a human perspective. But quickly enough. The early warning came from a deep space observatory run jointly by 2 council member worlds and a compact science station. all of whom were monitoring the same region for unrelated reasons. The readings were shared automatically through both the Council's Science Network and the Compact's Communications Relay. Everyone saw them at roughly the same time. The problem was not the star's death itself. Stars died all the time. The problem was its position. Slow Fire sat at the center of a system that was unfortunately placed relative to 4 inhabited worlds. 2 of those worlds were in the Marin hegemony. 2 were Compact members, the Seth and the newly joined Pari. When a star of that size collapsed and shed its outer layers in what astronomers called a slow burn ejection event, the resulting wave of radiation and high-energy debris would move outward in a predictable pattern. That pattern pointed very directly at all 4 worlds. The timeline was not kind. The initial ejection was estimated at 22 months away. The debris field would take another 6 months to reach the inner edge of the danger zone. The worlds in question had between 15 and 30 months, depending on their exact positions, to prepare, evacuate, or find some other solution. It was not technically a death sentence. The Marin worlds had their own infrastructure. They could begin evacuations. The Council could authorize emergency aid. 20 months was not a lot of time, but it was something. The Council convened. The session lasted 11 days. This was, in part, because the Council had 44 members, each of whom had opinions. It was also because several of those members had economic and political interests in the affected region that complicated the discussion of aid. The Marin had, over the years of the blockade dispute, acquired a fairly large number of political opponents within the Council, and a few of those opponents were not in a hurry to approve emergency resources from Marin worlds. None of them would say that out loud, but it shaped the discussion in invisible ways, the way politics always does. The debate went in circles. The scale of the evacuation was estimated. The cost was calculated. The question of who would pay was raised, disputed, tabled, raised again. The Marin wanted full Council support. Others wanted conditions. A working group was formed to study the feasibility of a debris deflection program, an attempt to redirect the ejection away from the inhabited systems. The working group was given 4 months to report back. Veth Ara sat through all of it. He was old now, genuinely old, and his silver eyes had a steadier, more tired look than they had 30 years ago. He ran the sessions carefully and fairly, as he always had. He kept the debate moving. He called votes when votes were possible, and he tabled things when they were not. Inside, quietly, he was counting the months. On the 22nd day after the warning reached the Council, a compact science team published a detailed analysis of the ejection pattern, the debris trajectory, and 3 potential intervention options. The document was shared freely through the compact network, and by extension, with any Council observatory that had a relay connection. It included full technical specifications, probability models, and a clear recommendation. Option 3, the document said, was the best. It involved large-scale mass driver installations at 4 specific points in the region, between the dying star and the inhabited systems. Mass drivers, very large ones, carefully positioned and precisely timed, could deflect the bulk of the debris field, redirecting it along a corridor that passed through empty space. The mathematics were clear. The engineering was, the document noted, not simple, but not impossible. The document also included a note at the end. The note said, "The Terran Compact has the capability to begin this work immediately. We can complete the primary installation within 47 days if we start now. We are prepared to do so for both Compact member worlds and the 2 Marin hegemony worlds, at no cost and with no conditions. We ask only that we be given unobstructed access to the relevant space." The Council's working group had not yet reported back. They had 2 months left on their 4-month study. Veth Ara read the note 3 times. He thought about mass drivers, not the small ones used for routine orbital work. Mass drivers of the scale described in the compact document were not, as far as he knew, something that any species in the galaxy currently operated. The engineering involved was considerable. The materials required were rare. The precision necessary was extraordinary. Building 4 of them, in space around a dying star in 47 days, was not a thing that could be done by accident. It was not a thing that could be done by a civilization that had been scrambling to survive isolation for 30 years. It was a thing that could only be done by a civilization that had been planning for it. He sat with that thought for a long time. 2 days after the Compact's offer arrived, before the Council had responded, the first Terran engineering ships appeared in the outer zone of the target region. They did not ask for permission. They did not need to. The space was neutral, and the offer had been made openly and on record. They simply arrived, and they began. The Seth watched from their orbital stations, hardly daring to breathe. The Pari, whose world was in the direct center of the projected debris corridor, had already begun quiet evacuation planning, but had told almost no one, because panic was worse than the problem. The Marin, who had received the offer through unofficial channels before the council session, said nothing publicly, but did not interfere. The work took 44 days, 3 days ahead of schedule. The mass drivers were enormous, each one a framework of assembled components, carefully engineered at the manufacture level and assembled in space with a speed that nobody watching fully understood. They moved in synchronized operation, timed to a precision of fractions of a second. Their calculations constantly updated by Terran AI systems, running models that tracked the ejection front in real time. On the 44th day, the dying star shed its outer layers in a wave of fire and light that could be seen with the naked eye from 3 of the 4 inhabited worlds. It was beautiful and terrible, a slow blooming brightness in the sky that lasted for 6 days. The debris field hit the mass driver network and changed direction. Not all of it. Nothing is ever perfect. Roughly 8% of the debris passed through gaps in coverage and continued on its original trajectory. This caused significant damage to automated systems in the outer orbits of 2 of the 4 worlds, destroyed several unmanned stations, and required emergency maneuvering by 7 ships that had not been clear of the zone in time. 92% of the debris was redirected into empty space, where it would travel for thousands of years without hitting anything of consequence. No inhabited world was struck. No one died. Vethara received the final report in his office on the 45th day. He read through it carefully. He looked at the numbers. He looked at the specifications for the mass drivers, their size, their capability, the technology that made them work. He thought about the quiet years of the Compact, the infrastructure that had grown while nobody watched, the engineering teams that had built relay stations and medical facilities and communication networks across 19 worlds, accumulating expertise and materials and organizational capability in ways that had looked, from a distance, like nothing more than small-scale aid work. He thought about what else might have been built during those years that he did not know about. The council chamber was full that day. Word had spread fast. The species whose worlds had been saved, all 4 of them, Compact and Marin alike, were present. The Marin representatives were very quiet. They were large creatures who did not show emotion easily, but something in the way they sat said that they were working through something difficult. Vethara called the session to order. The debris deflection operation was successful. 4 worlds are safe. The Terran Compact conducted the operation in full and has asked for nothing in return. He paused. I have one further note. In reviewing the technical specifications of the mass driver installation, our own scientific advisors have determined that the Compact's capabilities in this area exceed what was previously believed possible by any member or non-member civilization in known space. The hall was quiet. This means, he said slowly, that in the 30 years since Earth's banishment from this council, humanity has developed technologies and operational capabilities of a scale that none of us were aware of. He stopped. He looked at the delegates around him. He said what everyone was already thinking. We expelled them, and while we were not watching, they built something we cannot match. The silence in the hall was different from 30 years ago. That silence had been the quiet of a decision made and finished. This was the silence of people realizing that the story they thought was over had only just begun. The formal request came on a Tuesday. It was sent through the Asha, as most communications with the Terran Compact were, because the Asha had the best relay infrastructure in the Outer Ring, and had maintained polite and functional relationships with both the Council and the Compact throughout the 30 years of the banishment. The message arrived at the Compact's coordination office on Earth in the morning. It was read by the duty officer, who passed it to the senior coordinator, who brought it to the director of Compact Relations, who called an emergency meeting that afternoon. The message from the Galactic Council said, "We would like to discuss the possibility of Earth resuming a role in galactic governance. We are open to discussion of terms." The director of Compact Relations was a woman named Halo Price. She was 43, born in the 8th year after the banishment, and had never lived in a world where Earth was a council member. She had grown up in a civilization that built its own roads, made its own rules, and spent its energy helping people the council had forgotten. The council, to her, had always been something that existed at a distance, large, slow, not always relevant. She read the message twice, and then she set it down and looked at the people in the room. "Thoughts?" she said. The room was quiet for a moment. Then Jep, her chief of staff, said, "They need us more than we need them." "Yes," she said. "We have 19 worlds. They've lost 7 members in 5 years. The Dari, the Asha, the Ven, they never joined, but they don't cooperate with council requests anymore either. The Marin's toll income is down 60%. 3 of the smaller council members have quietly asked the Compact for infrastructure support." "Yes," she said again. "I know all of this. So what do we do?" Halo looked at the message again. She thought about what it meant, not just diplomatically, but in terms of the people it affected. The 19 worlds of the Compact. The millions of people on those worlds who had come to depend on the network of care and connection that 30 years of quiet work had built. The species who had been ignored by the old order, and would, if Earth simply rejoined the Council as before, likely find themselves ignored again. She thought about what Yara Chen had said. "There are 2 ways to change a thing. We don't go back," she said. "We invite them forward." She drafted the response herself. It was long. It was careful. It outlined in precise language the terms under which the Terran Compact would consider engagement with the Galactic Council. It was not a list of demands. That was important, and she chose every word to make sure it didn't sound like one. It was a proposal, a new charter, a different structure. Under the proposal, Earth would not be rejoining the old council. The old council would be dissolving and reforming as something new, a compact of worlds, expanded from the 19 Terran partner worlds to include any species that wished to join under the new terms. The new terms were simple: equal representation regardless of military or economic size, no veto blocks, no armament restrictions, shared infrastructure development, scientific and medical cooperation without conditions, a joint emergency response framework, directly inspired, though Halo did not say this explicitly, by the mass driver operation of 5 years prior. The old council could join. Its members could become members of the new structure, with equal standing alongside the Asha and the Dari and the 19 compact worlds, or they could remain as they were, a separate organization, increasingly less connected to a galaxy that was reorganizing itself around a different center of gravity. The message was sent. The waiting began. It lasted 11 days. Then the Galactic Council requested a formal session, not in the old hall with the ceiling lost in shadow. That building, the Compact delegation noted politely, held a particular symbolic meaning that was not helpful for fresh negotiations. They proposed a neutral site, a station in the middle reaches of the Outer Ring, recently built, well-equipped, and not associated with any previous political body. The council agreed. Halo Price arrived at the station with a small delegation. She was not a person who put much stock in dramatic entrances, but she noticed, as she walked through the docking corridor, that the station was genuinely neutral. Flags from no single world, signs in 12 languages, meeting rooms designed to be comfortable for at least 11 different biological profiles. Whoever had built it had been thinking carefully about the future. She appreciated that. The session began the next morning. Veth Ara was there, older still, moving slowly but present. He had asked to attend as an observer, not a representative. He had stepped back from his formal role 2 years ago, after the debris operation. He sat in the back row and said nothing during the session. He watched. The Marin came. They were large and quiet, and sat very still during most of the discussion. They had lost 3 council votes in the past 2 years. Their trade income had not recovered. They were, in the private language of their own councils, in serious trouble, and the Terran Compact's infrastructure network was the most obvious solution to several of their most pressing problems. They did not say any of this out loud, but Halo knew it, and they knew she knew it, and that shared knowledge made the conversation easier than it might have been. The Terek came. The Newell came. The Asha were already there. Of course they were. The Dari sent observers. The Ven sent observers. The Seth, whose world had been saved by the mass drivers, sent their full diplomatic team and arrived early. 27 species were in the room. The discussion lasted 4 days. There were disagreements. There were long pauses. There were moments when the Marin representatives' hands tightened on the table edge, and Halo chose to move on to the next agenda item instead of pushing the point. There were moments when the Asha representatives said something in their wind-through-grass language that was translated as a particularly precise and useful legal observation, and the whole room paused to appreciate it. On the 4th day, a draft charter was complete. On the 5th day, it was voted on. 44 worlds voted in favor. 3 abstained. No one voted against. Halo sat at the table while the vote count was read, and she kept her face very still. She was professional enough not to show what she was feeling, which was something large and complicated and not easily named. Pride, yes. Relief, also. Something else. A sense of weight settling, of a long and difficult thing finally arriving somewhere. After the session ended, she walked out onto the station's observation deck. It was a wide room with a curved window that looked out into open space. A clear view, no nearby stars, just the deep black and the distant slow scatter of light that was the galaxy. She had been told the view was good. It was better than good. It was the kind of view that reminded a person that they were very small, and that the things they built were still worth building. Vethara came and stood beside her. They stood quietly for a moment, not talking. He was very old. She was, by his standards, extremely young. They had both arrived here by very different roads. "I owe someone an apology," he said at last. "Though I understand, she is no longer with us." He meant Yara Chen, who had died 4 years ago, peacefully, in her house on a coast in Chile, watching the stars come out. Her smile, the one she had worn in the Great Hall 30 years ago, had been described so many times in so many accounts of those years that it had become something of a symbol. Reproduced in history texts, referenced in political discussions, occasionally painted on the sides of compact engineering vessels as a kind of unofficial insignia. "She'd have found it funny," Halo said, "being an apology." Perhaps. Vethara was quiet for a moment. She knew what was coming. All those years ago, she knew. She built it. It didn't just come. He nodded. "That is what I did not understand for a long time. I thought the banishment was something that happened to humanity, but for her, it was a beginning." Halo looked out at the stars. The new charter was signed. The new body had a name. The Charter of Worlds, it was called. Plain and simple, no grand titles. 27 members today, with more expected before the year was out. Equal seats. No veto blocks. A joint emergency response fleet that was already half built, using designs tested in the mass driver operation. An infrastructure fund that every member contributed to and every member drew from based on need. It was not perfect. Nothing built by living creatures ever was. There would be disputes, delays, moments of frustration. Some of the old power structures would find new ways to push their weight around. Politics did not stop being politics just because the room got bigger. But it was different. It was genuinely structurally different, in ways that mattered. Humanity had not come back to the old council. It had built something new, and the galaxy had come to it. Not all at once, not without argument, not without 30 years of hard and quiet and often invisible work. But it had come. Outside the window, a compact engineering vessel moved slowly through the dark, its running lights blinking in steady rhythm. On its hull, faint but visible in the station's reflected light, was a small painted image, a woman's face, smiling, simple, quiet, utterly calm. Halo watched it pass. She did not smile back. She didn't need to. The smile had already said everything, 30 years ago, in a great hall on an alien world, when the doors had closed and the work had begun.